The old silver car swayed along the patchy highway. The driver, Elliot Granger, a young reporter from Chicago, leaned back in his seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Hundreds of miles on the road had left him weary, but more than just sleepiness weighed him down. A strange, creeping feeling stirred in his chest as he neared Harrow's End. Elliot had never imagined this trip would feel like an expedition into a forgotten land. At first, he had laughed when his boss mentioned a town that vanished every harvest season. It sounded like a tall tale, hardly believable. But now, with the withered cornfields stretching on either side of the road, yellow-brown leaves whistling in the wind, and a leaden-gray sky pressing down, he began to doubt himself. When Elliot arrived in town, a faded wooden sign welcomed him. Welcome to Harrow's End. Population 312. Yet the number 312 seemed overwritten, blurred like a stain of blood. He drove past the sign, frowning. Stopping at a dilapidated roadside inn, he received the key from a thin man with a hoarse voice and vacant eyes. No greeting, just a look that seemed to warn Elliot to stay silent. Inside his room, Elliot realized the utter isolation. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, only the wind howling from the cracks. He opened his notebook, jotting down a few lines, deciding he would explore the town in the morning. But on the very first night, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. They didn't open doors, didn't speak, just paused silently outside his room. Elliot held his breath, and then the footsteps vanished into the darkness. He forced a laugh, convincing himself it was just a drunken guest. Yet a sense of unease clung to him. In his dream, Elliot saw empty houses, windows like wide open eyes, and a tall, thin figure wearing a straw hat standing motionless in the cornfield. Waking in a sweat, he realized that Harrow's End was not merely a place for investigation. Something was watching him, patient and unblinking. Now, a morning mist blanketed Harrow's End, draping the empty streets like a funeral shroud. Elliot walked through the town, his eyes catching faint traces of life. An abandoned grocery store, a cash register still holding a few boxes of cereal, a small house with forgotten children's toys, a bicycle leaning by the roadside, coated in rusty dust. Everything was there, but the owners had vanished. Inside the old library, the scent of damp paper filled his nostril. Elliot flipped through dusty newspapers, eyes glued to articles about families disappearing during harvest season or young people wandering into the fields, never to return. One article from 1897 made him shiver. A poor farmer left to die of thirst in the fields, his name printed in the paper, matching Elliot's own last name, Granger. He blinked, telling himself it was only coincidence. Yet the chill crawling down his spine refused to fade. Looking up, he saw a tall, thin figure wearing a straw hat in the field, reflected in the dusty window pane. Elliot rubbed his eyes, looked again. The figure was gone. Only his own pale face remained, blurred within the glass. Night fell, and the inn sank into silence. Heavy footsteps echoed along the hallway, just as they had on the first night. This time, Elliot didn't close the door. He cracked it open to peek. The hallway was empty, lit only by a flickering yellow bulb. The footsteps vanished, but the wind from the window at the far end carried a rustling sound, rhythmic, like invisible hands sweeping across dry leaves. Elliot stepped outside, moving toward the window, staring out into the field. The rows of corn swayed, and a tall, thin figure with a wide straw hat appeared. He raised his camera and snapped a photo. The flash lit the moment. In that brief burst of light, The figure's face emerged. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a solid, oppressive darkness. Looking closer, Elliot recognized trembling shapes within the shadow, faint as if written in smoke. Granger Doughty. His heart froze. The whole town, the harvest season, the family curse. It seemed to have recognized him. No. The second day in Harrow's End began with a thin layer of mist shrouding the town, blurring the empty streets. Elliot stepped out of the inn, a hollow feeling wrapping around him like a heavy cloak. No one was in sight, yet everything bore traces of life. Slightly open windows, scattered children's toys, dusty bicycles resting by the roadside. He made his way to the old library once more. Inside, the shelves were thick with dust, yellowed papers stacked high to the ceiling. Elliot rifled through the records, hands trembling as he turned pages brittle as ash, eyes fixed on names marked with a single chilling word: missing. Hundreds, thousands of names spanning generations, like cracks in time swallowing whole families. Elliot paused over an old 1897 newspaper article. A poor farmer had died in the harvest fields, mouth still clinging to dry earth, eyes wide open, and the man's surname matched his own: Granger. A shiver ran down Elliot's spine. Past and present seemed to merge, as if these pages had been waiting for him to open them. When he looked back toward the window, his eyes caught a faint figure in the field. Tall, thin, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, standing motionless among the rows of corn. He held his breath. The figure vanished the moment he rubbed his eyes, yet the feeling of being watched remained, heavy and oppressive. That night, the inn sank into thick silence. The footsteps returned along the hallway, heavy, steady. This time, Elliot no longer felt the instinctive fear. He opened the door, eyes scanning the empty corridor. Only the flickering light and the gust of wind carried a rustling sound, rhythmic, like invisible hands sweeping over the dry leaves outside the window. Elliot moved to the window, staring out at the field. The corn swayed, and the tall, thin figure with the straw hat appeared. He raised his camera and clicked. The flash lit the moment, revealing a dense darkness within the figure, with no eyes, no nose, no mouth. When the camera screen came back on, Elliot saw what froze his heart. In the dark background, dozens, maybe hundreds of shadowy figures, all wearing straw hats, standing upright, facing him. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just empty gazes fixed on him, as if trying to engulf his very existence. Elliot stepped back, heart pounding. One thing was clear: Harrow's End was not merely an abandoned town. It was a field of curses where lost souls lingered, waiting. And he, Granger, had walked straight into its inescapable spiral. Ay, Marie. The early morning mist still shrouded Harrow's End as Elliot left the inn, his eyes dark-rimmed and his body weary. He gripped his notebook and pen like the only lifeline he had, walking toward the old town hall, a low building with crumbling brick walls, moss-covered roof tiles, and wooden doors creaking as he pushed them open. Inside, dust hung thick in the air, sunlight filtering through grimy window panes. File shelves were stacked high, many books nearly rotted away. Elliot groped through them like a man seeking lost memories, hands trembling as he turned each brittle page. A 19th century land registry book made him freeze. One name stood out: Nathaniel Granger, the owner of a large tract of land in Harrow's End in 1897. A note beside it read, "Sold to associates, disappeared with family." Elliot read it over and over, heart hammering. Nathaniel, his distant ancestor, the man who had helped seize a betrayed farmer's land, sowing the seed of the curse. Another record, a local court transcript, stated, "Granger and Associates deny responsibility," beneath which, scrawled faintly in ink, were the chilling words, "Blood debt must be paid, harvest season after harvest season." Elliot's whole body shook. He realized that his family name was not just connected to the curse, it was its root. The town, the family, the harvest, everything seemed to be waiting for him. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. When he looked up, dry handprints appeared on the walls, dozens, hundreds, layered, all pointing toward where he sat. Faint, yet freshly imprinted, as if hundreds of invisible entities had pressed close from all sides. Elliot leapt up, tripping over a bookshelf. A stack of files fell, papers scattering into the air. Among them, he spotted an old photograph, the Granger family at the turn of the century. The man in the center was Nathaniel, tall and dark-eyed. Beside him, a boy of about 10, his face eerily like Elio's, eyes wide as if staring through the lens directly into the future. He let the photo drop, yet the sense of being watched lingered. Even with eyes closed, he could see those gazes piercing through space and time, a reminder that the curse was not merely a thing of the past. Stepping outside, Elliot drew a deep breath. The town lay silent, like a graveyard. Yet deep down, he understood. From now on, he was no longer an observer. He had become part of a century-old chain of cursed blood. And the straw-hatted figure, the Harvest Man, had noticed. Far across the field, the figure appeared. This time, Elliot no longer saw him as a stranger. In the shadowy outline, it reflected a part of himself. A cold reminder that past and present, the Granger family and the curse, were now inseparably entwined with Elliot's life. No. The third night in Harrow's End did not arrive with a familiar whistle of wind, but with a heavy silence, like a blanket pulled tightly over one's head. Elliot lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the darkness. No cars passed, no insects chirped, not even the faint rustle of the cornfields. Everything was still. The town seemed to have stopped breathing. Elliot dozed fitfully, tension coiling in his body, and the dream came. He found himself standing in the endless field, moonlight glinting off the dry corn stalks, turning them into shimmering blades. In the distance, a figure approached, Harvest Man. Slow, deliberate, the scythe in his hand cutting through the darkness. With each step he took, the rows of corn behind him silently collapsed, as if harvested clean. Elliot tried to turn and run, but his feet were rooted to the ground, heavy as stone. The face of Harvest Man, the same inky darkness he had seen in the photograph, absorbed the moonlight, swallowing even the air around it. Within that darkness, countless other faces appeared, old and young, all wearing straw hats, their eyes hollow, mouths whispering endlessly. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3 a.m. The room was icy, but what made Elliot shiver most was the smell, the scent of dry earth and rotting straw, thick as if the entire field had been dumped inside his room. Sitting up, he turned on the light and looked around. The bedspread was coated in pale brown dust, crumbled earth mixed with dry corn fibers. He checked his camera, but the screen was pitch black, even though the battery was full. When the flash briefly lit the room, he caught his reflection. Yet his eyes were empty, dark hollows gouged out of his face. The next day, Elliot wandered the town. Strange signs appeared everywhere. On brick walls, scrawled words, "It's harvest time." Clotheslines swayed in the wind, though no one lived there. The clatter of horse hooves echoed along the roadside, yet the street was empty, as if the sound came from a time long past. That evening, returning to the inn, the clerk remained silent, eyes vacant as he handed over the key. Elliot noticed his hands trembling slightly, as if holding something unbearably heavy. Sleep was impossible. Sitting by the window, gazing at the misty fields, Elliot saw the harvestman appear, motionless. Around him, dozens of other figures rose from the earth, silently turning toward him. No movement, no sound. Only hollow gazes, dense as if the entire field had become a pair of enormous eyes. Elliot sank deep into the chair, heart frozen. The curse was no longer just a story he had been told. It had spoken his name, and it would not stop until the Granger family debt was repaid or another heir was pulled into the endless nightmare. Oh, I. The next morning, Elliot left the inn in a half-awake haze. The sky was gray, the dim light too weak to illuminate the empty streets clearly. He walked toward the old town hall, a low building with crumbling brick walls, moss-covered roof tiles, and wooden doors that creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, dust lay thick in the air, sunlight filtering through grimy window panes. Filer shelves were stacked high, many books nearly rotted away. Elliot groped through them like a man searching for his own memories, hands trembling as he turned pages brittle as ash. A 19th century land registry book made him freeze. One name stood out clearly: Nathaniel Granger, the owner of a large tract of land in Harrow's End in 1897. A note beside it read, "Sold to associates, disappeared with family." Elliot read it again and again, heart pounding. Nathaniel, his distant ancestor, the man who had helped seize a betrayed farmer's land, sowing the seed of the curse. He opened another file, a local court transcript, the handwriting shaky. Granger and Associates deny responsibility. Below, another scrawl in faded ink. Blood debt must be paid. Harvest season after harvest season. Elliot collapsed into a dusty wooden chair, body trembling. He realized clearly, the Granger family was not merely linked to the curse, they were its root. The town had decayed along the cracks left by their ancestors. Suddenly, the room seemed to shrink. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. When he looked up, dozens, even hundreds of dry handprints appeared on the walls, layered one atop the other, all pointing toward where he sat. Faint, yet unmistakably fresh, as if an invisible crowd had pressed close from all directions. Elliot leapt up, falling against a bookshelf. Files scattered across the floor. Among the papers, he spotted an old photograph. The Granger family from the turn of the century. The man standing in the center was Nathaniel, dark-eyed. Beside him, a boy of about 10, face strikingly similar to Elio's, eyes wide, staring through the lens as if looking straight into the future. He let the photo drop, yet the sense of being watched lingered. Even with eyes closed, he could see those gazes, piercing through space and time, reminding him that the curse was not merely a thing of the past. Stepping outside the building, Elliot drew a deep breath. The town lay silent, like a graveyard. Yet deep inside he knew, from now on, he was no longer an observer. He had become a link in the chain of cursed blood spanning over a century. Far across the field, the straw-hatted figure appeared again. This time, Elliot recognized him no longer as a stranger. Within the shadowy outline, he reflected a part of Elliot himself. A chilling reminder that past and present, the curse and the family, were now entwined with his life. The final night of the harvest descended on Harrow's End. Elliot sat in his room, the desk lamp casting a pale yellow light on his hollowed face. His eyelids felt unbearably heavy, yet he dared not close them. Outside, the wind shifted, no longer slipping quietly through the cracks, but blowing in relentless gusts, as if a crowd of invisible bodies breathed in unison. Suddenly, everything stopped. Silence so absolute that Elliot could hear the pounding of his own heart. The world seemed frozen in place. He stood and stepped into the hallway. No phantom footsteps echoed like the nights before. Only absolute emptiness, darkness swallowing every trace of light. He walked down the main street, past darkened houses and abandoned shops. Each footstep echoed, emphasizing the void. When he reached the edge of the cornfield, moonlight faintly illuminated thousands of dry stalks, unmoving. Elliot held his breath. A subtle movement occurred. The rows of corn bent in unison, as if swept by invisible scythes. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Harvest Man. Tall and thin, tattered straw hat atop his head, scythe gleaming like a shattered moon in his hand. He did not rush, only took slow, deliberate steps. But with each heartbeat, the distance between him and Elliot shrank. From either side of the field, dozens of other figures rose. Hundreds, all wearing straw hats, hollow eyes fixed on him, standing silently. No movement, no sound. Their presence was dense, pressing in, making Elliot feel as if an invisible crowd was swallowing him whole. Harvest Man stopped a few steps away. The wind kicked up dust and leaves in a whirlwind. Amid the storm, a voice rang out, not from a single mouth, but from hundreds at once, a chorus. It's harvest time. The debt must be paid. Elliot clutched his head, mind reeling. Images of Nathaniel Granger, the betraying ancestor, flashed before him. Then came the faces of Grangers across generations, one after another, linked by cursed blood. They pressed down on him, reminding him there was no escape. In the dust-laden wind, Elliot lifted his gaze to the darkness of Harvest Man. This time he saw clearly. The face was his own. Twisted eye sockets empty, skin cracked and dry like parched earth. A choked cry escaped, but the wind swallowed it instantly. Harrow's End dissolved behind him. Every house, every street fading like smoke. Only the field remained, the wind, and the endless shadows. Elliot sensed one undeniable truth. The curse had recognized its successor. He was no longer an observer. He had become part of the eternal harvest, bound to Granger blood, whether he wanted it or not. The gray sky hung heavy. The wind whispered, and the field murmured again, waiting for the next season. Why? The sea wind cut through skin like blades, sweeping across the abandoned streets of a coastal Maine town. At the end of the muddy road, a gray wooden house stood silently, its shattered windows gaping like dead eyes, staring into the endless void. Locals called it the House Without Shadows, a place that, according to whispers, had swallowed an entire family back in 1987. No one spoke of them anymore, only the vague tale that Darkness took everything. Ethan stood before the house, clutching an old tape recorder and a notebook filled with scribbled notes about urban legends. His eyes gleamed with curiosity. This was the chance to write a study that, he was certain, would astonish his professor. Beside him, Maya crossed her arms, her thick coat failing to keep out the creeping cold. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she was here, not for research, but for Ethan. She sighed, her gaze locked on the house. For a fleeting moment, Maya felt as if the house itself was staring back, and that something inside the shadows beyond its door was waiting to be called. That night, they had no idea that once they stepped across the threshold, their shadows would never belong to them again. The wooden door groaned as Ethan pushed it open. A stench of mold, rotting timber, and old seaweed spilled out, making Connor, who had tagged along last minute, just a vlog for fun, cough violently. Jesus, this place is like a haunted house straight out of a movie, Connor joked, raising his phone camera to sweep across the room. Though he laughed, his voice quivered slightly. The flashlight beam swept over the living room. Crooked picture frames still hung on the wall, glass cloudy, the images inside faded but faintly showing the outlines of a family. Ethan eagerly recorded into his tape. Note, this is the exact spot of the 1987 disappearance. They say no bodies were found. No shadows either. Maya rolled her eyes. Ethan, seriously, these are just stories locals tell to scare each other. This house is no different from any other old abandoned one. But then, as Maya passed a cracked mirror leaning against the wall, her heart clenched. For a split second, she saw her shadow not moving in sync. Her body had only just turned, yet in the glass the shadow stood still, head tilted toward her as if watching. She blinked, and everything was normal again. Ethan was scribbling, Connor mumbling to his camera. Maya bit her lip and stayed silent. Out in the hallway, the darkness seemed thicker than usual. It felt as though it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to step in. Connor laughed as he spun his phone camera for a selfie. All right, folks, tonight's adventure, the house without shadows. If I disappear tomorrow, don't forget to donate to my channel. Maya glanced at him, shaking her head, but then a chill ran through her. The flashlight from Connor's phone hit the floor, and his shadow didn't match. Connor's real arm was raised, holding his phone, but in the shadow, the arm hung limply by his side. And worse, the shadow was smiling, a grin stretched far too wide, while Connor's actual face stayed neutral. Maya gasped, grabbing Ethan's arm. Do you see that? Ethan looked up, swinging his flashlight toward Connor. Instantly, the darkness recoiled, snapping back into proper shape. Only the worn wooden floor remained, nothing amiss. Connor frowned. See what? Maya, are you okay? Her tongue felt heavy. How could she explain? Yet, just before the light swept away, Maya swore Connor's shadow had turned its head and stared right at her. At the end of the hallway, a patch of blackness darker than night itself trembled faintly, as if breathing. Knee. The hallway stretched endlessly, wood groaning beneath each step. Connor led the way, phone light in hand, cracking jokes. Ethan followed close, while Maya forced herself to stay calm, eyes flicking constantly to the shadows on the floor. Suddenly, Connor froze. Hey, did you guys hear that? His voice shook. they all went silent. From the darkness at the far end came a faint sound, like a whisper. At first barely audible, then clearer, closer. Connor. Connor's face strained white. He spun toward his friends. "Did one of you just say my name?" "No," Ethan replied, eyes wide with fascination as he scribbled furiously. "This is proof paranormal audio could be residual haunting." Maya cut him off, her tone sharp. "Not the time for research, Ethan." She glanced down, and her stomach dropped. Connor's shadow on the floor was reaching for him, arms stretching out slowly, inch by inch. Connor remained oblivious. "Move!" Maya screamed, yanking him back. At that instant, the shadow shot up, a flat human shape tearing itself from the floorboards, its black hand nearly grabbing Connor's ankle before it recoiled, melting back into the hallway darkness. Connor fell hard, face pale as death. God, what the hell was that?" Ethan whispered, voice trembling yet awestruck. "It's real." At the far end of the hallway, the darkness no longer lay still. It pulsed like a heartbeat, and each time the flashlight beam swept past, faint glimmers of eyes flashed, then vanished. Connor still trembled, clinging to Ethan's shoulder as Maya swept her flashlight desperately over the floor. The weak yellow light slid across rotten wood, stopping at a corner where the blackness was so thick, no beam could pierce it. Suddenly, something yanked Connor's leg. He screamed, falling forward, phone skidding away. Ethan lunged, but Connor was already being dragged across the floorboards, as if by invisible claws beneath. His legs sank straight into his own shadow. "Hold me! Don't let it take me!" Connor shrieked, fingers clawing at the planks until his nails split and bled. Maya grabbed him, feeling the unnatural, icy force pulling down. His face twisted, eyes rolling back, half his body already vanishing into a black abyss. Ethan panicked, darting his eyes around. "There has to be something, anything!" In desperation, Maya snatched the fallen flashlight and blasted the beam straight into Connor's shadow. A shrill screech rang out, like metal grinding on stone. The shadow convulsed violently, then slowly released. Connor spilled onto the floor, gasping, drenched in cold sweat. The darkness shrank back to the corner, retreating, but the eyes still lingered, glowing bright for a heartbeat before vanishing. The three of them froze, hearts pounding in unison. Connor, voice hoarse, whispered, That thing. It's waiting for us inside our own shadows." The sound of the sea wind outside now felt artificial, echoing from somewhere impossibly far away. Ethan helped Connor to his feet, while Maya clutched the flashlight so tightly her trembling fingers refused to let go. "We have to get out, now," Maya said firmly. They rushed toward the front door. Connor nearly collapsed with every step, but fear kept him moving. Ethan yanked the creaking wooden door open and... outside was not the street, not the sea, but a solid wall of ink-black darkness. No wind, no waves, only an eerie, suffocating silence. When the flashlight beam swept across, it was swallowed whole, illuminating nothing, not even an inch ahead. Maya staggered back, No, no way. It wasn't like this when we came in. They tried the windows. The old glass cracked easily, but beyond it was the same impenetrable blackness as the door. Connor hurled a piece of wood outside, only to watch it vanish without a sound the instant it crossed the frame. Ethan scribbled with shaking hands, muttering, Maybe this house isn't part of the real world anymore. It slipped into its domain. Its domain? Connor shouted, eyes wild. You mean the thing in the shadows? We're not getting out. No one answered. But then, from the far end of the hallway, dozens of shadows appeared on the wall. Not their own shadows. These were thin, distorted, unnaturally tall, packed together like an invisible crowd. Every single one faced the trio, silent, waiting. Connor pressed himself against the wall, trembling. Are those the people who went missing? One shadow tilted its head ever so slightly, and in that instant, glowing eyes flickered to life, staring directly at them. Nay! The shadows crowded the hallway, silent as if they had been waiting for these three unlucky souls all along. Ethan lifted his tape recorder with trembling hands and whispered, They're the ones it took. Connor shook his head violently, eyes bloodshot. No, I don't want to be one of them. Maya held him back, but her eyes stayed fixed on the figures creeping closer. Their forms writhed unnaturally, jerking as if pulled by invisible strings. Suddenly, one shadow darted forward, merging with Maya's own on the floor. For a heartbeat, her shadow turned its head toward Ethan and Connor, grinning wide, while Maya froze, feeling an icy hand squeeze her heart from within. Shine it on me, Maya screamed. Ethan swung the flashlight. The beam struck her shadow, making it convulse violently before peeling away and dissolving into nothing. Maya collapsed, gasping, eyes brimming with tears. Connor panicked, shouting, It won't stop! We have to get out of here! They scrambled up the stairs, every rotten plank groaning like it might give way. At the second floor, only one room remained intact, a closed door, a faint golden glow leaking out from the crack beneath. Desperate, they shoved it open. Inside was a small bedroom, thick with dust, but in the center burned a dim oil lamp. Strangely, its weak light held back every trace of darkness. The shadows in the hallway dared not enter. Ethan nearly wept with relief. Real light. This is how we fight it. Connor rushed to grab the lamp, but the flames sputtered violently, resisting him. A cold wind surged through, making the flame flicker. Outside, the crowd of shadows pressed closer, their elongated arms reaching, clawing at the doorway. Maya rasped, voice hoarse. If the flame goes out, so do we. In the chaos, Connor slipped. The lamp toppled, the flame snuffed out. Darkness instantly flooded the room, swallowing everything whole. The shadows surged in, whispers filling the air, voices overlapping, calling each of their names. Ethan. Maya? Connor. Maya felt icy fingers clutch her shoulders, yanking her down. Connor screamed, thrashing, then was dragged away, his cry cut off mid-breath as if a hand had smothered it. Ethan, in despair, clung to Maya, his shaking hand fumbling for the recorder. His final words trembled out. "If anyone finds this tape, remember, stay away from your shadow." Their screams rose one last time, then silence. And The next morning, the wooden house still stood silent on the Maine coast. Shattered windows reflected the pale, frigid daylight. There was no trace of Ethan, Maya, or Connor. Only Ethan's notebook lay in the dust. On its last page, scrawled in a shaky hand, were the words, "The darkness doesn't follow us, it leads." And if one looked closely in the noonday sun, the shadow of the house itself seemed slightly off, not quite matching its shape. No, why? Ethan stared out the dormitory window, where spindly branches swayed in the late autumn wind. The cold seeped through the glass, sending a shiver down his spine. He didn't think much of the chill. What truly made him uneasy were the stories he had just heard from a classmate, ancient legends about an abandoned church deep in the forests of New England. The villages surrounding the small town each had their own tales, but the story of this church was different. It began in the 19th century, when a sudden fire broke out during a service, consuming most of the building. No one knew the exact cause, and the most terrifying part wasn't the fire itself, but what came afterward. Locals whispered about a choir echoing on moonless nights, a sound emerging from nowhere, as if the voices of the church still lingered among the ashes. Clara, sitting beside Ethan, glanced at him, a mixture of curiosity and worry in her eyes. "You're really planning to go see it?" she asked softly, as if afraid someone might hear. Ethan smirked, eyes alight with curiosity. "I've been researching it for a week.
You can hide from me?
Old churches always leave behind unique cultural and musical traces. If anything truly strange exists, this is a good opportunity to witness it firsthand." Marcus patted Ethan on the shoulder, laughing. "Just observe, don't become part of the legend. I heard that if anyone goes alone, they might disappear forever." Lena, who usually believed in the supernatural more than anyone, sighed. "I don't know, but it sounds creepy. Are you really planning to go tonight?" Ethan nodded. "Exactly. At night, everything comes alive." Clara frowned, an uneasy feeling creeping over her. She was always sensitive to sound, and the thought of voices echoing from the darkness, from the charred walls, made her heart race. But for Ethan, curiosity outweighed fear. He imagined the ruined church, cracked bricks, blackened arches, and statues burnt to ghostly silhouettes. In his mind, it was both horrifying and alluring, like an ancient secret waiting to be discovered. Before darkness fully fell, the friends gathered to discuss their route, lighting equipment, and safety measures. Yet any preparation seemed small compared to what awaited them in the dark New England forest, where the singing could erupt at any moment, calling the living closer and never letting them go. Ethan hoisted his backpack, excitement thrumming in his chest. He had no idea that even as he stepped out of the dorm, what awaited the group was not merely folklore, but a living entity. A silent choir whose voices could shake the mind of anyone alive. The New England sky darkened rapidly, clouds thickly veiling the moon. The four friends stepped onto a trail leading deep into the forest, faint light spilling from flashlights and handheld lanterns. Each step sank into dry leaves and damp soil, producing eerie sounds in the stillness. Ethan led the way, guided by an old map he had obtained from the local library. Clara walked close beside him, eyes scanning the towering trees, hands gripping her flashlight. Marcus occasionally joked to lighten the tense atmosphere, while Lena sighed, wide-eyed as if afraid something might leap from the shadows. The path narrowed, flanked by tall trees whose gnarled branches stretched like hollow hands, knocking together in the wind. The damp scent of the ancient forest mingled with the faint smell of charred wood left from the fire decades ago. Ethan sensed something unusual. The deeper they went, the stranger the silence became, leaving only the sound of their footsteps and, occasionally, the rustle of leaves whispering. "Have we actually seen the church yet?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Almost," Ethan replied calmly, though his heart raced. "I saw it on the map, just around the next bend." And then, from the depths ahead, a faint sound began to reach their ears, like singing, far away, weak, each note flickering in and out. The friends froze, flashlights trembling in their hands. "Do you hear that?" Lena whispered, voice shaking. Marcus raised an eyebrow, feigning bravery. "Sounds like someone singing in the bushes, or a ghost singing." He laughed, but the smile faded as the singing grew clearer, sweet yet horrifying, like a faint hymn from a bygone century. Clara felt a strange vibration in her ears, as if the song were calling her name. She turned to Ethan, eyes wide. "Do you hear it? It's targeting me." Ethan said nothing, but he knew the sound was not an illusion. It had order, rhythm, and a strange, hypnotic power. They continued forward, their steps lighter, drawn toward the source. The church's remnants came into view under the flashlights, the collapsed roof, blackened walls, shattered stained glass, and statues burned halfway. The air was dense, as if every living thing held its breath to hear the invisible choir. The singing grew louder, echoing through the ashen walls and mingling with the wind through the cracks. Marcus began to feel uneasy. Lena shivered, and Clara seemed entranced, her eyes wide, the whites stark in the darkness. Ethan moved forward, sensing that something extraordinary awaited inside. Not just legend, but a reality that existed, waiting for the curious to enter. And in that moment, as the friends stood before the cracked wooden door of the church, they didn't know that their next step would lead them into a terrifying realm, long unspoken of, where the voices no longer belonged to the living. The friends pushed open the old door. The hinges screeched like a sigh. Inside, darkness swallowed every step, only weak flashlight beams casting uneven light on the charred walls. The smell of smoke and mold enveloped them, forcing them to hold their breath as they stepped further in. The faint singing they had heard in the forest now echoed clearly, seemingly coming from all directions at once. Slow, melodious, yet chilling. It seeped into every corner of their minds. Clara froze, gripping her flashlight tightly, heart racing. The voice was soft, but enchanting, as if each note were calling her by name. Ethan advanced, observing. He realized the sound had a definite structure, not random, like an ancient hymn long lost. Flashlight beams revealed burnt and cracked walls, collapsed arches hovering, and a large empty space at the end where the singing was loudest. Marcus scoffed, attempting to break the tension. Probably just the old church corpses. Singing, he joked, but his laugh faltered as a prolonged note resonated just behind him. Lena grabbed Clara's hand, pale-faced. "I don't know. Should we turn back? But Ethan shook his head resolutely. We came this far. We have to see it through. There's something we need to witness. Clara followed, feeling drawn toward the sound. The singing penetrated her mind, gentle yet eerie, making her want to step forward and join the invisible choir. She shivered, almost hypnotized, only breaking away when Lena shook her shoulder. The singing didn't just fill the space, it vibrated in the bones, as if the entire church breathed in rhythm. Ethan sensed a strange presence, not a malevolent ghost, but something sacred, ancient, existing between life and death. They stopped in the nave, where rows of old pews sat neatly. For the first time, they saw faint movements in the shadows. The singing continued, drawing them deeper into the church, where the boundary between life and death grew thin. In a brief moment of silence, they realized this was no longer a story or a legend. They were facing a horrifying reality. The music led the way, and if one wasn't careful, they might never leave. The friends moved into the church's nave, where flashlight beams barely lit the cracked tile floor. The singing grew clearer, wrapping around them, making the air dense and almost alive. Ethan crouched to examine the pews, and what he first noticed froze him. The figures seated upright were not living. Marcus stammered, "Wait, those are mummies?" Before them, desiccated corpses sat in rows, mouths open as if singing. Their skin was dry, hair tangled, eyes hollow, yet the sound emanating from their mouths continued, a centuries-old hymn, pure yet terrifying. Not an echo or simulation, but a living sound, rhythmic and pitched, though the bodies were stiff and lifeless. Clara trembled, staring at a corpse directly ahead, feeling as if its song called her personally. Lena stepped back, clutching Ethan's arm. "Don't look too long. I feel like it wants to pull me in." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to analyze. The air wasn't hostile. The singing bore no malice, no harshness, no growls. Instead, it was sacred, like an ancient ritual, as if these souls continued their final mission, singing the hymn even after leaving life behind. Marcus, usually joking, stepped closer, eyes wide with awe and fear. "I can't believe they're really singing." He shivered, unable to look away. Clara felt a strange vibration coursing through her body. The voice entered her mind, sweet and hypnotic, making her want to speak, to join in. Ethan quickly grabbed her hand, pulling her back. "We have to stay alert, Clara. Don't let the music deceive us." The singing continued, but now it was no longer a distant legend. It existed, calling, drawing them to the edge between life and death. The friends stood frozen, terrified and amazed, realizing that every folktale they had heard was just the tip of the iceberg. Ethan swept his flashlight across the mummified faces, mouths open, producing the mesmerizing sound. He knew that if anyone wasn't careful, they might never leave, and that the singing wasn't just a song, but an invitation, reaching out toward every step they took in the darkness. Pow! The singing surrounded them, each note seeming to seep into the friends' very veins. Ethan stood still, trying to analyze the sound, and finally realized this was not random music. It was an ancient hymn, long lost, once sung in the church before the fire. Each note, each chord had a purpose, as if weaving an invisible net to pull the living inside. Clara stepped slowly toward the mummified corpses, eyes wide, almost hypnotized. The singing penetrated her mind, gentle yet insistent, softly coaxing. She felt invited, as if the music were speaking to her. "Join us, sing with us." Lena grasped Clara's hand, trying to pull her back from the trance, voice trembling. "Clara, come back, don't listen to them." Marcus, however, was curious, stepping closer. "See, can we try touching it? Just a little?" He laughed nervously, but the smile quickly died when the singing surged louder, as if reacting to his curiosity. Ethan sensed a strange energy filling the room. He pulled Clara away, emphasizing, "This music isn't just for scare tactics. It wants to invite the living to join. And once you join, there's no turning back." Clara shivered, struggling against the hypnotic pull. "Ethan, are you sure we won't get pulled in?" "We have to get out before it's too late." Ethan's eyes scanned the room, serious. He knew that if they weren't careful, even a single hesitation could allow the mummified choir to claim one of them as the next member of the silent choir. The singing now pulsed rhythmically, blending with their breaths, making Clara feel as if each step was drawing her into the center of the nave. Lena held her back in time, while Ethan swept his flashlight around, searching for an escape. Marcus, despite the warning, edged closer, curiosity overpowering caution. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He knew if Marcus didn't stop, something terrible would happen. The singing continued, no longer harmless. Every note was an invitation, gentle yet irresistibly powerful. The friends realized that the line between life and death now lay in the hymn itself. Ethan took a deep breath, grasped Clara's hand tightly, and silently vowed. They had to choose, escape or be drawn into the music. The friends stood in the vast nave, flashlight beams trembling across charred walls and rows of old pews. The singing filled the space, long, soft, and eerie. Clara almost froze, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, as if ready to sing. Ethan quickly grabbed her hand, voice urgent. "Clara, no, this isn't ordinary music. It's trying to pull you in." But Clara shivered, her hand loosening from Ethan's grip, hypnotized by the sound. A vibration ran deep into her bones, compelling her to step toward the mummies seated in rows, to join their song. I want to sing," she whispered, barely controlling herself. Lena shook her, voice trembling. "Clara, listen to me. Step back. If you start singing, you won't escape." Marcus, on the other hand, was consumed by curiosity. He stepped closer to the pews, eyes bright, touching a mummified figure. A louder note rang out, seemingly responding to his curiosity. He hesitated briefly, but too late. A force pulled him toward the center of the choir, the flashlight wobbling violently. Ethan shouted and lunged to grab Marcus, but his hand passed through empty air. Marcus had vanished, drawn into the heart of the music. The remaining friends stared in horror at the spot he had just occupied, leaving only empty pews and the still singing hymn, sweet and terrifying. Clara gasped, panicked. "Marcus! Marcus!" She clutched Ethan's hand, struggling against the song's pull. Ethan pulled her from the center, glancing back at the mummified choir. The music still echoed, calling the remaining steps. He whispered, "We have to get out. Now." The friends bolted for the main doors, hearts pounding, footsteps unsteady on the cracked tiles. Darkness and music seemed to grasp at them, But Ethan's determination and Lena's composure were enough to help Clara break free from the trance. Once outside, the cold night air enveloped them like a saving cloak. Yet even as they distanced themselves from the church, the hymn lingered in Ethan's mind. A reminder that one member had been left behind, and that a new silent choir had begun to form. Shy. The next morning, weak sunlight filtered through the forest canopy as the friends returned to the church, hoping to find Marcus and explain what had happened. But as they entered the nave, the sight froze them in place. The old pews remained neatly aligned, the mummified corpses still seated, mouths open as if humming a hymn. But this time, there was a new member. In the center, where Marcus had once stood, a fresh mummy had appeared, stiff and lifeless, mouth parted as if ready to sing. Marcus was gone, replaced by the cold, silent form. Clara grasped Ethan's hand tightly, heart racing. "No, it can't be," she whispered, eyes wide. Ethan stepped closer, tension and regret in his gaze. "We didn't make it in time." He surveyed the nave, realizing that the choir was not merely a legend, but a living entity, always expanding, inviting the curious. Lena was pale, clutching Ethan's sleeve. We have to go," she said, voice trembling. The friends silently left the church, each step heavy with loss. Even in the daylight, they could still faintly hear the hymn, soft yet eerie, seeping into their minds. Ethan sensed it clearly. Even if they left the place, a part of the music followed them, a reminder that the silent choir never truly ended. It was still waiting, still growing, and anyone curious enough would become the next member. The friends walked silently toward the path leading out of the forest, carrying lingering fear and an unspoken question. Was Marcus truly gone, or had he fully merged into the eternal hymn of the silent choir? From afar, in the charred remains of the church, the haunting voices continued endlessly, beckoning new footsteps.